class. When I present it, I'm using the resource from the website nutritionfacts.org and trying to make that in an understandable language. He does a great job, I think, for the layman, but sometimes you don't have the background to interpret what he's saying. And so some of these topics at first glance seem very dry, and you think, why would you want to sit here for an hour to learn about such a topic? And so that's my goal, is to present it here so that we can make it interesting, we can apply it, and we can make it seem like there's going to be some reason why we came here to learn this stuff. Because I find this stuff fascinating, and I hope you can too. This is the kind of information that is, I would say, cutting edge, because it comes from research that is obtained currently, and so it's information that is sometimes not something you would get if you visit your family doctor. They would not have this information at their fingertips, because most family doctors aren't looking at this website and keeping up in the area of lifestyle. They get good at learning what's the latest treatment for diabetes with medication, but not how to treat diabetes so you don't have to take any medication. So it's a different angle, different focus. All right. Well, welcome. I'm glad everyone could make it. So our topic today is to focus on learning more about reducing our risk for stroke. It's one of the top 3 killers. And there are many components that go into why does a person have a stroke. And it's not surprising that it's a lifestyle that is our biggest risk. The good news is that if your parents or your friends had a stroke, it's not something that you have to experience just because you're related to them or you eat like them. You can choose to change those risks. All right. So each day I usually start, each time we present, we focus on a theme from the scriptures. And for those who haven't been through this format, I think there's an important reason why we do that. So many doctors I think are missing the point for why people get sick. The reason we get sick is because we don't follow the 8 laws of health. Genetics plays a small role in most diseases, but we tend to think that it's because of our genes that's why we're sick. The good news is that we're not doomed by something that we can't control. But when it comes to illness, why we get sick is often not just because we're missing some pill. The choices are gradual. It's things we grew up with, the way we were raised, and it's not always in a healthy way. So today's topic, let me go back. One reason in terms of health, anxiety and fear is a big real reason why disease is in our society. The reasons we eat what we eat, the reasons we exercise the way we do, is often because of anxiety and fear. If we don't treat the cause, then we're stuck wondering why we can't treat the symptoms. The symptoms might be overeating, it might be choosing the wrong foods, it might be choosing not to exercise, to be a couch potato. Whatever our strategy is for handling fear and anxiety, it's more effective if you treat the cause. I mean, that's what the whole field of psychiatry is about. Treat the cause, and you don't have to keep a person on pills that really don't work that well. And so that's what this verse is trying to attempt. So let me just turn this down. It says, "But now thus says the Lord, who created you, O Jacob, and formed you, O Israel. Fear not, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by name. You are mine. When you pass through the water, I will be with you. In the rivers you shall not drown. when you walk through the fire, you shall not be burned. That comes from the book of Isaiah, chapter 43. At first glance, it's just very uplifting language, but this was written to people in Israel. This was not just any old phrase to encourage them. These were things that were in their mind, because when they grew up in school, they would learn the stories of history. They didn't have TV back then to distract them, so they learned their history very well from their parents and from the schools. Welcome. And so the reference to when you pass through the waters came from their history. When they passed through the waters of the Red Sea. That would have been one of the stories they would remember. When they walked through the rivers, that would have been the river of Jordan, when they crossed into the land of Israel. The river was at a high stage. They couldn't just walk across and not drown. So the waters parted there. And through the fire, that's, I believe, a reference to when Daniel and Daniel's three friends were standing up for their beliefs. The religious freedom was at stake. And they were thrown in the fire for that reason. And, well, they didn't burn. These were all references to God making a way when things seemed impossible. And that's kind of the encouragement we can take from those lessons, is when we find things in our life that we can't control, fear and anxiety is the result. It's better to leave the things we can't control in the hands of somebody who created us than to try and mull it over our head over and over and then end up in dysfunctional ways with eating disorders or exercise disorders. There should be a handout back there. Oh. And so I find these words encouraging. If you can understand history, you can learn from history and be encouraged by those lessons. God didn't create us to end up sick. He created us with a mind to learn from other people's experiences. And that's what this class is to do, is so we can learn smarter instead of harder. So we don't have to learn the hard way by experiencing disease. We can avoid it by seeing how disease is affecting others. And in the process, we can receive the healing that a lifestyle changes accomplish. Let's start with a word of prayer. Gracious Father, thank you so much for giving us wisdom and insight that as our Creator, you have destined us for a life of health and a life of peace and joy. Through those trials that the Israelites went through, they learned to trust you more. May we have that same trust, that you are interested in our good health and you will guide us through our times of trials. We pray this all in Jesus' name. Amen. So, sometimes I wish I could present all these topics, but we just choose one. Here we go. So this is from the website, as it says, by Dr. Michael Greger. It's called nutritionfacts.org. And you wonder, how is sodium supposed to be something interesting? Sodium is something we get lots of in an American diet. If you just ate food that came from your garden and you didn't have access to a salt shaker, you would be eating a very low sodium diet. So that's kind of the diet that people had before there was industrialization to make salt so widely available. What does that mean? Well, it turns out that sodium and potassium, they both are important for regulating how much energy or voltage is across each cell membrane. And so when those ratios are the wrong ratios, it affects that voltage. And so it's affecting every cell in our body. It turns out that if you look at the first sentence, let me get this started. So what I thought we would do is just listen to his presentation. We can stop at some of the charts. This is a transcript of what he's saying to remind you later. And I find his charts are helpful but they go kind of quick. So by pausing it, you can digest the chart a little bit more. It starts out in the first paragraph quoting some medical text from the Persians. Doctors are not a new invention. They've been around since disease first started. We may not have had all the right answers with their technology, but so they would have myths, wives' tales, and so on. So for treating hypertension, the Persians suggested some interventions, such as avoiding meat and pastries, and they recommended eating spinach. They had a few other recommendations that he skipped. Not all of it was based on good science. And so they must have understood something about the health of spinach, even 900 years, what's that, over 1,000 years ago.
Can I ask a question?
You sure can.
Is there a difference between taking a regular salt or sea salt? Because I used to get really low blood pressure until I had, I was shaking and nauseated. And so I would have him fix me salt water because I didn't know what else to do to get my blood pressure up. And I used to always do this with regular salt. Well, he was giving me what I didn't know at the time, sea salt. And I said, what kind of salt are you giving me? Because I was still feeling terrible. And he said, sea salt. So I figured sea salt would not raise my blood pressure.
Well, sea salt gets a good advertising bonus at the shelf because it looks like it's natural. It's not as artificial as the things we mine out of the ground. What comes out of the ground is usually pure sodium chloride. And the sea salt is mixed with all the other minerals that wash off the land. So it's mostly sodium, but you're going to have other trace minerals in there. It's going to be a little potassium, a little chloride. Go ahead.
Also, usually what you're talking about is table salt, okay? And table salt has been heated to over 2,400 degrees to get all the moisture out, and it changes it chemically also.
So you'll probably find very little difference in terms of if the major ingredient is still sodium in sea salt, that's the major effect on you. All these trace minerals, I'd say, play a minor role. If you're eating a salad, you're going to get way more trace minerals from the salad than you will from the sea salt. So that's going to affect the levels of these other elements in the sea salt way more. So to me, the sea salt is more an advertising thing. They tend to make the crystals bigger. So what happens when you sprinkle big crystals now on your baked potato instead of the fine salt that usually is made? You're going to have more sodium ingestion. Big crystals don't dissolve quickly in your mouth, so they pass right through you. But you can only taste the ones that dissolve. So that means you're ingesting more salt if you want to salt your food to an equivalent level. So smaller crystals or powdered salt is actually better for you in the sense that you're going to put less on your food. And so these big crystals are more useful for cooking where they have time to dissolve. But I wouldn't use them necessarily for sprinkling on my food.
Would sea salt have mercury in it?
It does, but at such low levels,
Okay.
it's usually only an issue when you eat food that is higher up on the food chain. So if you eat the fish that ate the plankton, that ate the mercury, then you're going to get some concentration of the mercury. It's really hard, even like say there's radiation fallout on your garden, you're not going to get as toxic a dose as if you drink the milk that the cow ate from the grass that received the same radiation because it gets concentrated. And so when you have these toxins, they're less dangerous to you if you get them directly from nature instead of through an animal. Any question?
No question. I am overweight. I'm trying to change my diet. Last night I made tofu with a bunch of vegetables and Japanese style noodles.
Excellent.
But the thing is, I've been getting cramps in my body, and I bought magnesium pills or vitamins.
Yes?
And I think my salt ratio is off because I was drinking a lot of salt water, like she had said, for cramping.
Okay.
I don't know if I should be getting potassium pills also. Say eat very low bananas,
Well, that's kind of what we'll touch on today,
Okay.
is to find ways to tip our balance away from sodium and more potassium, because that's the key, is this ratio. If you have an excess of sodium, then you need even more potassium to have your blood pressure in a more normal range. Sodium in our bodies tends to hold on to water, so that's how the body decides how much water is it going to be in our body, is by regulating not the water but the sodium, because the water follows the sodium molecules. And so if we get too much salt in our diets, we're going to retain more fluid. And you notice that effect even more when you have a weak heart, then that effect becomes more pronounced, because you for various reasons on your kidney and your heart. Go ahead.
Are the lab values for sodium in the blood valid, or is that,
I believe they are.
okay? I mean, they say their averaging should run from a certain amount to a certain amount.
You know, we make life and death decisions based on those numbers.
Right.
When they're low in the ICU, you can get serious complications, so they raise it up with IV fluid. If it's too high and your kidneys work well, your kidneys can get rid of it. If they give you a diuretic, you're peeing off more sodium to get rid of the sodium. So let's hear what, this is fairly quick, just a few minutes video. May take us a little longer as we pause through some of the charts. This is by Dr. Greger. Okay, hold on. I'm just going to have to backtrack and take this in. Okay. Let's try.
1,000 years later, researchers discovered that a single meal containing spinach could indeed reduce blood pressure thanks to its nitrate content. All green leafy vegetables are packed with this stuff, which our body can use to create nitric oxide that
Here's one of the charts he's referring to. You can see on the left side they're measuring blood pressure. It goes from 106 up to 122. And then at the bottom is time. It's a little bigger. So they're noticing that just you have two groups here. The one group is being fed the spinach, and they're trying to see, does that meal have any impact on our blood pressure? And generally doctors don't prescribe a meal of spinach for treating blood pressure. They'll give you some kind of pills. But if this has no side effects, why shouldn't we know about it?
Yeah.
And so he's showing that it's not a huge difference. It might be like 4 points between these two groups. And then you think, well, why should you care about such a small impact on your blood pressure if it goes from, let's say, 120 down to 116? How's that going to make you healthier?
I've been in the 180 to 210 until Wednesday.
Yeah.
I got put on 3 blood pressure meds.
All right. Well, it's good that they're finding a way to fix it.
Finally.
Because it's nice if we can find ways to wean ourselves off the need for the medicines. So what he's showing here is that by adding spinach, which is a dark leafy food. So what other foods are dark and leafy? Well, we'll cover some of those examples. You can think of kale. What do most people put in their salad? Iceberg lettuce. It's not dark and it's not dark and green. So it'll have some of the good stuff, but it's much smaller amounts.
What about something like, not the leaf lettuce, that has like 2 leaves and it's yellow. The lettuce that comes,
Like the baby green?
romaine, what about romaine and some of those?
Yeah. Well, they're all good for you. I'm not saying that But by focusing on the dark green leafy ones, we're probably getting more value in this area. They're going to have more of the things like spinach. They have a higher level of potassium. And
Does Swiss chard fall into that category?
it does.
Okay.
It really does. So anything that looks to you like dark and green, like spinach, will be higher in the level of potassium. Spinach is good in not just having high potassium levels, but it has this nitrates. And nitrates can be turned in your body into nitric acid. That's a chemical that the cells that line our blood vessels are using to control blood pressure. So when somebody has this system out of control, they have ischemia of the coronary arteries because the arteries are too small. And then those artery cells, the endothelial cells, don't make more of this nitric acid. It uses an enzyme to do it on demand, but if it doesn't make enough, people will take this nitroglycerin pills. So they're trying to increase that amount that the body can dilate these arteries.
Don't they use nitrates to cure leaks?
Those are a different form.
Okay.
These nitrates that come from spinach don't have the same effect. Although, if our organic chem teacher advised us to eat the spinach that was just fresh, not the older black spoiled spinach that was in the fridge like a few days. Because he said once you have more of those, the nitrates would have a change in the reaction. In the stomach, the acid would combine and you get nitrosamines. And the nitrosamines are a potent chemical for creating cancer. I haven't heard of anyone getting cancer from eating fresh spinach stuff, so it's a different category.
So he just says if it's black around the edges, don't eat it?
Yeah, and if it looks spoiled and old.
Okay.
So usually nobody would want to because it doesn't look appealing. But here's just another reason why it pays not to just grab a whole handful, but to just look through it.
I didn't realize it was lethal.
Unfortunately. And so, okay. He said he's kind of taking this example of, let's say you drop 4 points. Well, who cares? Well, as a society, we should care because that equates to 10,000 fewer fatal strokes in this country. That's not just strokes. Fatal strokes means you died of the stroke. There's a lot of strokes that are experienced above that are non-fatal, but you're symptomatic from it. So just a small difference like that among 300 million people is still a huge change and a huge benefit. So our numbers do play a role, even though we don't feel any different. If our numbers are high or if our numbers are low, inside our body's health is really affected.
Of our arteries, which may be why eating our greens may be one of the most powerful things we can do to reduce our chronic disease risk. Just switching from low nitrate vegetables to high nitrate vegetables for a week can lower blood pressures by about 4 points. And the higher the blood pressure they started out with, the greater benefit they got. 4 points might not sound like a lot, but even a 2-point drop in blood pressure could prevent more than 10,000 fatal strokes every year here in the U.S. Potassium-rich foods may also act via a similar mechanism. If we just got the minimum recommended daily intake of potassium, we might prevent 150,000 strokes every year because potassium appears to increase the release of nitric oxide. 1 week of eating 2 bananas and a large baked potato every day significantly improved arterial function. Even a single high potassium meal containing the equivalent of 2 to 3 bananas worth of potassium can improve.
So, if you have somebody where it's a good source of potassium, What's a good source that pops in your head? Any ideas?
Green leafy vegetables, potatoes of all kinds, bananas and beans.
She's got it down.
That is-
Well,
Something else?
well, the first example, spinach, is way higher than bananas. But often, bananas are marketed because they're a good source of potassium. They're on the order of, I believe it's 200. So they're on the lower side of the range for good sources. If it's got 200 or more milligrams of potassium in a serving, they're considered a high source or a good source of potassium. So we'll find examples of what the different foods have as we go along. But bananas are not the gold standard. The spinach is more than double.
Less fattening too.
So I'm not saying don't eat bananas, I'm just saying that's not our only choice for what's a good source of potassium. So he's jumping into talking about potassium, but he's not really explaining all the background on it. The short version is, if you're eating more potassium and less sodium, you're going to have your blood pressures in a better balance. That's the big picture, boiled down version of that. So if you understand that idea, all these other facts kind of play into how do we get there, or what causes the disease when we are low on potassium. So let's say we just eat an average sodium diet in America. Well, it's hard to measure what that is, but it's usually way higher than what it should be. They're recommending, like a teaspoon, for instance, is not a lot of, if you ever cooked and you put a teaspoon of salt in a big pot of water, it's not a lot. But they're recommending less than that in a day for a person. So where are those sources coming from? They're not coming from the fruits and vegetables that we're eating. They're coming from all the processed foods. And so how do we get to a healthier level of sodium without abandoning it? I think that is worth spending a little time on, because if a doctor is trying to get you to lower your blood pressure, and that's ultimately the stepping stone, like how do you reduce your stroke risk? You treat the risk factors for the stroke. Blood pressure, high cholesterol, those are two of the big factors that lead to a stroke. So here we're attacking one of the big ones that a big chunk of our society is experiencing. So by having a lower sodium level, we're going to reduce our blood pressure a small amount. But by having a higher potassium level, now the ratio is tipping even in a better direction, we'll have a more pronounced improvement in the blood pressure. And so that's not the only factor that plays a role, and this is something that doctors don't often understand or pay much attention to. There are many chronic things that affect the blood pressure. These are kind of short term, which means that if you eat foods that, or you change your diet so that there's no more sodium coming in at these high levels, you eat a lot more potassium in your food, within a few days or hours, you're going to see these changes in your blood pressure. It doesn't take like months and years to see an improvement. It's a quick change in our blood pressure. So why is it that if somebody's now decided to go on a new lifestyle course, they want to do everything to live better, why is it that their blood pressure can get better now over months and years? Well, there's other factors. The blood pressure is controlled by many unstudied areas, but it seems like chronic inflammation is one factor. And we see high blood sugars creating chronic high blood pressure. So one reason a person with diabetes has high blood pressure is because the aorta gets very stiff. The wall of the aorta gets crispy, just like when you leave an elastic in a drawer for a few years, they get very crispy. The elastic fibers in our aorta will do the same. And that can happen in somebody who doesn't have diabetes. It just happens a little faster when you have diabetes because it's caused by the high blood sugars attaching permanently to those elastic fibers in our aorta. And so once it gets crispy, then you get systolic high blood pressure. So you still have blood flowing through the aorta, it's just now its job is to expand and contract so that the pulse of your heart cycle is kind of averaged out more evenly. So with that aorta being stiff, you're going to have systolic high blood pressure, which is the higher number. Now some things we can control, we can still undo that effect. So that's not the only factor that leads to high blood pressure, but it's one of the factors that is kind of difficult to undo after 40 or 50 years of eating with refined carbohydrates. That stiffened aorta is not going to go back to the way it was when it was 20. And so we can improve it, but we may not go back to normal. And so I'm trying to share some of these other mechanisms that we have more control over that are reversible. There's other effects of the high blood pressure, so I think it's still a good thing. Like last week we talked about how to create more normal blood sugars by the foods we eat. And what did we realize was a big factor besides the refined carbohydrate at the meal. Let's say you eat a baked potato. It's not refined carbohydrate per se, but it digests fairly quick and can raise our blood sugars fairly quick. What foods will raise that?
Anything with fiber. It's
Anything
going
with
to
what?
decrease, anything with fiber in it is going to decrease
Yeah.
the blood level of sugar.
Fiber is a big factor, and so more fiber in our diet is helpful. What I thought was interesting is they brought out that protein at the meal. Raises our blood sugars after the meal. And yet, when you're teaching a diabetic what to eat at a meal, they never say that the protein is evil in terms of raising your blood sugar. They focus on the potato, they focus on the sodas, they focus on desserts, anything with carbohydrates they're focusing on, but they don't tell you avoid eating the fish with the meal. You think, well,